Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of meeting one of our Agile Academy ambassadors. Today, I'm hosting Bernie Maloney. Bernie and I met at one of the global Scrum gatherings. I don't even remember
It,
exactly
it,
which
it
one
was
it was.
Prague. It was Prague. It was 2015.
It was 2015, but
Yep.
then
It was,
also there
you had
was,
just been confirmed.
I had just been confirmed as a CST, but then I think it was the next one where you offered a Hawaiian meditation session.
That was 2017 when I was approved as a CST. Yeah.
Yes, and I was so interested in participating, and I participated, and I think it was the first time I truly meditated. And after that, I decided, oh, you need to do this more often. And as it is with many intentions, I didn't follow through on it until a few years later. I really decided to make it a habit. But that one interaction, that one participation in your session really was to some extent life-changing for me. So Bernie,
Thank you. Thank you.
already thank you for that.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Yeah, and happy to have you with us today. So Bernie, I'll start with the same question that I ask every single one of our ambassadors. Where did your agile journey start? Where, when, which context? What was your role?
So I kind of trace my roots in Agile way back to my time in HP in the consumer PC division. And this is right around the time of the formation of the manifesto. And you got to understand that market a little bit. It was a very fast moving market, consumer PCs. So this is 25 years ago from the time that we were recording, or that we are recording this. Consumer PCs at that time were desk side PCs. They had a lot of sheet metal in them. I'm a mechanical engineer by training, so I come at Agile in a way different fashion than most people do in Agile. Sheet metal has about a 14-month lead time. Motherboards have about a 9-month lead time, but the shelf life of consumer PCs is only about 3 months because Intel changes their roadmap every 3 months. And if you didn't get your product into market, into the retailer on the day you said you would, it wasn't like you missed a week of your addressable market. It was more like you missed 30% of your addressable market. So really tight time pressures. The margins were super thin. On a good day, we had an 8% gross margin. For some of the holiday products, a 2% gross margin. So tight margins, tight timelines. We recognized that we had to move fast. Now, what we called it then was adaptive program management. We did weekly iterations of our plan. We did high complexity. So by the time I left after about 8 years, we were shipping 200 products a quarter in Europe alone. High volumes for some of our holiday products, we would do 100,000 units in a single model. So with that complexity, with that volume, we had distributed teams where we had volume manufacturing in Asia, engineering here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and go to market for Europe was out of Grenoble, France. Distributed teams, all the classical sorts of things. It was the fastest division in HP's history to hit $1 billion a quarter. At one point in my career, I was tactically responsible for the delivery of 2% of HP's top line revenue. And we did all that with weekly iterations of a plan. We all knew it was magic. It was only after I left that division, went to the TV division, that I first heard the words Agile. And I recognized that was kind of the secret sauce. It gave me language to describe what we were doing. Now, at about the same time, I had begun studying a field called neuro-linguistic programming, which is really at its root the study of really good languaging. And part of what NLP teaches is if there's a pattern and if you can find someone with a successful pattern, you can copy it. And language is a way of copying that pattern. And so when I encountered Agile, I knew this is the language that describes exactly what we've done. This can go wider than this. So I knew that was magic. And that kind of started me on my path formally to Agile, even though I'd already been practicing for nearly a decade with these techniques. NLP started to take me into you referenced the Ho'oponopono meditation. So as I got deeper into NLP, I studied Huna, which is considered Hawaiian shamanism. So it deals in some metaphysics and it really gets into some deeper stuff. And all of that led me to skills that I have in my toolkit to help people make breakthroughs. And kind of my big vision Sohrab is taking those tools and helping organizations make breakthroughs in performance the same way that I experienced at HP. For instance, with some of those tools that I've talked about on a personal level, I've helped people release irrational fears that border on a phobia inside of about 90 minutes in a session. And so I know these breakthroughs are absolutely possible. And at that personal level, it's really transformational. And at an organizational level, it's transformational as well. So, kind of my vision is taking this set of tools and helping organizations make breakthroughs in performance. Now, that can be with teams. The real leverage is honestly with leaders, because that's, in my opinion, one of the biggest things that holds organizations back is kind of the mental models that they have about their organizational systems. And then that kind of gets back into NLP, that kind of gets back into Agile.
Okay. Wow. Within a few minutes, you connected all of those topics to each other. So let's go to that adaptive thing for a
Okay.
moment, right?
Okay.
What you called it adaptive product management?
Adaptive program management is literally what
Program
we called
management.
it. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, it had aspects of product management. It had aspects of project management. It had, Scrum mastery, product ownership. It really had a blend of all of that.
Yeah. Now, that's exactly where I want to go. Now, when you look at that in hindsight, now you speak this agile language, right? Which gives this whole thing that you can describe the patterns, it creates the magic. But if you look at with the terminology you have today, and you look at this adaptive program management that in the late 1990s, early 2000s, you were already living at
Yep.
HP in hardware development, right?
Yep. Oh,
Where
yes.
today, even a lot of people are like, can we even apply agile at hardware? Right? That
Oh
question
my
is
gosh.
out
No,
there.
you just have to have a different mental model to make
Yeah.
it work in hardware.
Yeah.
The key thing for those listening is you got to find abstraction layers. Abstraction layers are going to be something that folks in software really get, but you got to find a way of abstracting the hardware, and then you absolutely can run iterations.
Yeah. Now, with the language you have today, which elements of what we consider today agile, elements from Scrum as a framework, did you already apply back then at HP?
Holy smokes. Okay. So let me start with a heartbeat. So every week we had a series of meetings. On Fridays, we had a meeting called Gavel. And that was where
Level?
we gavel is what we called it because it was gavel, make decisions.
Okay.
Okay. We
Okay.
were, the management team there, part of the magic sauce, which is another topic in and of itself, was the management there had a philosophy of make new mistakes. They knew in this tight margin, tight timeline, high volume, high mix, mistakes were going to be made. And so long as it was an honest mistake, you'd be forgiven once. And like I've got a story about the weekend I blew $1 million of HP's money and I was forgiven. I've even got a conference talk that I call Make New Mistakes. That is all about that, which is all about psychological safety, really. So Gavel was a decision making meeting. And I would compare that directly to sprint review and to a minor degree to sprint planning.
Hmm.
So Thursdays, we would have the system team meeting, is what we called it. And the system team meeting was looking out about 3 months in through our model line to be making or, figuring out what our recommendations were going to be to management at Gavel the next day. To a degree, that was a bit of backlog refinement. It was a bit of sprint planning that was there.
Hmm.
Did we do a daily scrum? No. But by golly, for running a $1 billion a quarter business with 400 people in the division, I really only needed to talk to somewhere between 4 and 10 people. We were really a cross-functional team. We tended to run between me as a system manager, a product manager is what HP called it, and then our finance rep. And our finance rep was essentially the general and administrative
Hmm.
aspect of it, being sure that we were hitting our targets. The product manager was there really talking about the market, and I was talking about the feasibility.
Hmm.
So if you look at some of the stuff like Marty Kagan articulates these days, I was in touch with the technology for what was feasible, and the product manager was there for what's valuable.
Mm.
And the finance rep was there for what's viable is the language that I use, or is going to have impact for the
Yes.
business. Usability was something that was commonly shared. So we didn't have that fourth element that Marty Kagan articulates in his stuff. So let's see, I've talked about backlog refinement, sprint planning, sprint review. Daily Scrum was more walking around. It really wasn't a daily meeting for something like that. Um, what am I missing, Saurabh? Retros, we didn't do weekly retros. So we didn't do individual sprint retros, but we would do a retrospective for a release. So for a quarterly release. We'd also back it up, and we would do uh, a, a, uh, a go-to-market sort of a plan for the quarter, and we would be looking out 2 to 3 quarters in advance as we were looking at that overall road mapping session. And we do that about once a quarter. Those are some of the direct corollaries that I can see to what we now articulate as Scrum.
Yeah. So already a ton of the patterns, a ton of the mechanisms that result in certain behaviors you were using back then. Now, before we jump away from there and come to today's day and age, I have one more question, because what I'm always intrigued in is when we look at systems within organizations, how organizations do work, create value. Those systems, those mechanisms are implemented by leaders, by people. Do you happen to know who implemented the model, this adaptive program management at HP back in those days? Was it a relict from Dave Packard and Bill Hewlett,
No,
or did it come up later in time?
no. So I think it was organic. Webb McKinney was the founding general manager of that division, and they knew this market was going to move fast. They had that sense, and they recognized that they needed to turn faster than Compaq was a separate company at the time, and Compaq was the dominant force in the consumer PC industry at that point in time. They also recognized the competitive advantage. Compaq, because it really had a basis in commercial PCs, and commercial PCs don't want to change. They want stability because they only want to change models about every 3 years. So that led to some latency in the way Compaq was running their business. They were running monthly iterations on their interactions with retailers. And early on, it was decided that we were going to run faster. It was essentially that if you've got a smaller ship, you can turn faster inside of it. It was basically startup mentality. You see, you see exactly these same patterns in startups. So this was very intrapreneurial versus entrepreneurial. And those things are really well articulated. Like I like some of Marty Kagan's work. I recently went through his Transformed, and I think he's really articulating Agile. He talks about, and I describe it as 3 dimensions of Agile. If you go on my YouTube channel, and I've got one YouTube that I put out on this recently. So lots of organizations, they only use Agile in 1 dimension. How to build, how to build faster.
That's
It's all
delivery.
about a machine mentality of the overall system. But Marty articulates there's a couple of other dimensions. Now, he doesn't quite articulate it the way that I do. As a mechanical engineer, I think of things in multiple dimensions. So there's also, how to solve problems is what he talks about it. I talk about where I talk about this as delivery agility along with Marty. I talk about this as outcome agility.
Mhm.
So we all talk about outputs, okay, and outcomes. This is about value to your customers. Okay. And then there's a third dimension, which is all about impact. And I consider this business or strategic agility. And this is all about what problems to solve. This is exactly what startups do. They start out not with how to deliver. They start out with, is there a problem worth solving? How do we solve that problem? And then they go and deliver. But too many organizations, they just apply Agile in only this 1 dimension. Let's just go make things go faster. They're not getting into the whole idea of discovering the problems to solve. That's what that division did is they discovered the problem to solve in the marketplace
Yeah.
and they applied it. So Webb and his founding management team, I think, really came up with this organically. I think the term adaptive program management came from a book that one of them came across 4 or 5 years later. I'd have to really dig and see if I have that book in my book list.
Well, I think to the point you mentioned that most businesses are focused on just the output agility, is they operate under the assumption that they already know. the other
Yep.
two,
Yep.
which they don't, right?
They don't.
With regards to their traditional business model, they do. But whenever they go into new products, new business models, etc., they don't. So they need to figure out how to also address those things. But now, given we have a time box, Bernie, 2000s, now it's 2025. So
Yep.
20, 25 years later, what brought you from the work that you did at HP as a program manager, as a mechanical engineer, to doing the work that you're doing today, as you defined as your big vision is helping people and organizations make breakthroughs? What was that journey?
So I've already referenced it a little bit.
Yeah.
So in HP, we all knew it was magic. When I started studying NLP and recognizing that if you've got language to describe patterns, you can replicate the patterns. And then understanding the language of Agile, I recognized, wow, this can be replicated. I also knew from NLP that you can make huge breakthroughs through a series of career instances. Very few of my career changes have been by choice; they've been by circumstance. I got into Agile coaching, and then that really set me on the path. Working more deeply as I studied NLP and HUNA, I recognized the power of these breakthroughs. And as I got deeper and deeper as an Agile coach, I eventually became a trainer, which kind of leads me to where I am today. So, with a CST credential, I offer public classes, I offer private classes through the academy. Folks can contact me. And it's really all about those classes are an initial introduction into the breakthroughs that are possible. And then it's about a deeper level engagement
Yes.
with those organizations. So, am I even in the ballpark of where you were going with this, Sora?
Yeah,
Okay.
more or less. So that's where the real work then starts, right? So
Yep. Yep.
people in many cases, same with me, right? People come and join our classes. They get a sense of what we talk about, how we talk about things, whether they can relate with us, whether our experiences relate to the work that they do. And then they make that choice to say, all right, we want to change things. And sometimes they try to do things first themselves, or sometimes from the get-go, they decide we'd like to have a sparring partner on our side.
Yes.
Now, I want to explore this with you, and I want to take one of the quotes you mentioned, and maybe we can connect this as we go through the rest of the conversation. You said, make new mistakes. Now, when you work with your clients, to what extent do you use that quote? Do you use that mindset when they are on the path to making those breakthroughs that they need, both as an individual and as an organizational unit?
So, one of the things that I do early on in pretty much every engagement, Rob, is I introduce a satir curve. Now, most people are more familiar with, excuse me, let me get a little water in my throat. Most people are more familiar with Bruce Tuckman's terms of forming, storming, norming, and performing. Virginia Satir was a contemporary of Bruce's, another psychologist, and she was also one of the patterns that was studied for neuro-linguistic programming. Because part of the magic for me, Saurabh, is when I got formal education in Agile, I recognized with that reference to Satir, oh my gosh, I'm looking at two different aspects of the same thing here. That's what like really lit me up. Virginia drew things as a picture, and pictures, paint 1,000 words. So the whole idea of the breakdown leading to the breakthrough is something that I introduce very early on with pretty much every engagement, because any change you make is going to lead to a breakdown in performance, that forming and storming in Bruce Tuckman's language. And the big question is, how much of that can you tolerate? Okay. Because it's going to be an integral under the curve. And so part of what I learned through NLP is with love, you have to help your client make that breakdown so that they can let go of their old patterns, so that they can then install new patterns and new ways of working so that they can make that breakthrough. So big thing that I do is I'll draw a satir curve, because that image sticks with people and they get it. And when I do that, and when things go sideways, which they always do, what people tend to do is they look around, they go, I, I, I guess we're in breakdown right now. I guess we're in storming. And because they realize that collectively, it releases some of the tension so that they can get to the norming portion, and start to make some of the breakthrough. So,
And the breakthrough then would be the performing piece, right?
well, yeah, the breakthrough takes you to the performing. Yeah.
It takes you to the performing. Now, when I want to visualize this, is that picture similar to the change model?
So I tend to draw it
Change curve,
this
I
way,
see.
and so you'll have to tell me, Saurabh, since the video is a little reversed for me. I usually try to draw this so people see it. So this should be the left side of the screen,
Yeah,
the way
it
that
is.
people are looking at it. Okay, and so when you start out, you've got a forming event. Think of diet and exercise in January when people make those New Year's resolutions. Oh, then it gets so hard. Now you're into storming until you turn the curve. Now, what most people want to do when they get into storming is they want to go back to the way things were.
Yes.
And so if you let them know that up front, okay,
Gonna be
great.
hard.
It helps them to. Seth Godin described this as the dip. It's, do you pivot or do you persevere? And so it's once they see the curve, and I'll draw this like on a sheet of paper as a visual, or I'll draw it with my finger in the air like this. But Virginia Satir is where I first learned that curve. So I like to credit my sources.
Okay, cool, cool. So now looking at this, right? People going through that dip, and then getting to that breakthrough. When you think about the work that you do with organizations, what are the breakthroughs that you are looking for? And I'm not asking from a business outcome perspective, like, oh, we make more revenue or we have better margins. What other types of breakthroughs do you work towards that then ultimately result in those outcomes?
Ooh. So the big one that I work on them is, most organizations have a mental model of their system. What holds us all back from breakthroughs is our mental models of things.
Mm.
A real simple illustration of this is, Saurabh, put yourself exactly where you are geographically in the world, but it's the year 1800. Let me ask you an honest question: Can man fly?
No.
Great. Okay, get back in that time machine that I just gave you. Come back to 2025. You're still in the same geographic location. Let me ask you, Saurabh, can man fly?
Yes.
What changed? Nothing about
Technology.
the laws of physics, just your mental model of what can
Yeah.
man fly means. And so there's these mental models that we all have, that organizations have about their systems. Now, one of the handy things that I've learned, and this was when I was with Persistent, is there's three eras of organizations: born before the internet, born in the internet, born in the cloud. Organizations born before the internet were born when things moved slowly and you could plan and predict things. They have a mental model of the system being a mechanism.
Mhm.
Organizations and like banks, governments, mining, manufacturing, automotive, they have a mental model of the system being, plan and predict. That it's a machine. Machines you can plan and predict. Organizations born in the internet here in Silicon Valley, places like Cisco, PayPal, they do a little bit better with Agile. Okay. They still have their problems. Organizations born in the cloud, some examples of clients I've worked with: Stripe and Square. Have had people that I've worked with. They're natively Agile because they were born about the time of the manifesto. So it's that mental model of the system being a mechanism. Those organizations that have that mental model of Agile being a mechanism, they're only using Agile in that one dimension.
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier.
The organizations that were born in the cloud, they're already thinking, the way that we know Agile is possible in these three dimensions, because they're looking for those problems to solve and ways to solve those problems before they go and apply it. So getting an organization to recognize their mental model of the system, this is even echoed in language. Like I said, language really can change things. One of the things you learn in NLP is language does not merely describe reality, it creates reality. So one of the things I'll ask, Saurabh, do you hear a lot of organizations talk about efficiency?
Yes, a lot.
Okay. Efficiency is the language of mechanisms. It's the language of capacity utilization. Okay. Instead, Agile is really all about effectiveness. Okay. Which is about the delivery of value. Now, Saurabh, I know you've got some medical background, and a question I'll ask folks is, do you go to your doctor for an efficient treatment or an effective treatment? What you got
Effective.
to do is you've got to change the mental model of the system from being a mechanism that you can plan and predict to a mental model of something that you sense and respond with. And that's going to be an organism or an ecosystem. So those biological references, like that are prevalent in the medical field. Another one is metrics. You ever hear organizations talk about metrics?
Yes, a lot.
Cool. That's the language of mechanisms. So what you want to do is you want to change that to the language of organisms. And instead of metrics, consider them diagnostics. You got
Mm,
to come at this with curiosity. Another great reference I like to have is Ted Lasso season one dartboard episode. Be
yes,
curious, not judgmental.
yes.
Too much of the way management training has been plan and predict, has been judgmental. Okay. And
Instead of
instead, it
process.
needs to be sense and respond. You need to change that mental model of what the system is. And when you do that, that's what frees you up to make breakthroughs the same way that changing your mental model of what man fly, what that means can open you up to the possibility of, well, he doesn't have to flap his arms like a bird. There's other ways of achieving flight.
Absolutely. Wow. Bernie, I love this. I could have this conversation for way longer than we time boxed it for. Now we're getting to the very end of our time box. We're
Yes.
actually slightly behind or beyond the time box. But I'll ask one last question, and which is people that are interested in learning more about you, probably even working with you. What is your preferred way for them contacting you, other than through us, obviously? But how else
Yeah.
can they connect with you?
So you can go to my own website, poweredbyteams.com.
Hmm.
/contact. And I've got a contact form there, and that's an easy way to find me. You can also find me pretty easily on LinkedIn as Bernie Maloney. That's BernieMaloney. And you can probably message me on LinkedIn as well. Those are a couple of easy ways to find me.
Perfect. We will obviously both link your website and when these things go live on LinkedIn, link to your profile directly. And with this said, Bernie, I loved so many elements of this conversation. Other than having these getting to know the ambassador, I want to get you on another conversation where we deep dive
Sure.
on making new mistakes and so many other ways to get to breakthroughs. Thank you so much for this conversation today, Bernie.
Thank you, Sohrab.